Good morrow, fellow travelers. Welcome to the Fantasy Folk, where we discuss all things in the fantasy genre from books and games to television and film. My name is Jordan Wiegand, and with me as my traveling companion down these fantastical roads is Ron. How are you today, Ron?
I'm doing good, man. Feeling refreshed. We had a couple weeks off from the show to kind of plan out where we're going next. And,
Yeah.
today, technically, our last show was our first step into Westeros, but it was more of a bridging the gap between that and a lot of the Lord of the Rings, House of the Rings of Power coverage that we've been doing. So today's our firm first day talking nothing but Game of Thrones / Song of Ice and Fire. And I'm so stoked to get into it with you.
Yeah, we were plotting out how we're going to do this. We decided to take kind of like a week off, or almost like a week and a half, I guess, right? Like
Mhm.
because like usually we record on Fridays and we try to get them out Fridays, and we're recording on a Monday. So we went one Friday with 2 Fridays without recording, but like we're only a couple days past that
Mhm.
last Friday. Um, we're gonna try to switch to bi-weekly releases right now until like maybe the next show pops up. Just there's not too much to talk about right now, so it's just kind of we do this for fun. We don't want to get burnt out as well. So it's one of those things where right now we'll go bi-weekly. Shows come out,
Lord,
we'll
Lord
try to
knows
go
we've got
weekly.
enough other shows other podcasts to worry about too. So
Yeah, because if you don't know, if you found us just through this show, we do have a whole network, Logjam Media, um, where we discuss, uh, the why am I blanking? Marvel Cinematic
Marvel,
Universe,
DC, Star Wars, all
DC,
of it.
Star Wars, all that good stuff on those shows. So like, we're covering Agatha, we're covering Penguin and Superman and Lois, which is exhausting having two shows on that one right now. And then we just wrapped up, of course, this Rings of Power coverage, and then on Star Wars, we're ramping up for a Skeleton Crew,
Mhm.
which is coming up soon. So lots of good content throughout Logjam Media, where you can find Ron and I and other friends of ours on those shows. You mentioned it last episode. We did like this fun bridge where we had a thought process of how do we like who would you want in the Game of Thrones universe to be part of a fellowship? So that was kind of kicking off the bridge over to here, and now we're going to talk mainly Game of Thrones this episode. We'll talk House of the Dragon stuff, I think, in the next episode, and just kind of talk about, you know, what we really thought about those first two seasons, and then the thoughts of like George R. R. Martin's thoughts of those first two
Yeah,
seasons,
yeah.
I guess. And
And we'll
also,
and we'll get into I was just gonna say we'll get into discussing some Hedge Knight stuff, Knight of the
yeah,
Seven Kingdoms, all that kind of look ahead stuff. That'll be, I guess, technically a part two to this episode, but for
yeah,
this one we kind of wanted to just chat Game of Thrones. We're gonna talk about all of our houses, our favorite episodes, favorite seasons, all that good stuff. Just kind of like we did with our intro episode, but just
yeah.
a little more specific so that people know where we're coming from as Game of Thrones fans.
Yeah, and I think we would have probably done something similar to Rings of Power had it not been like the launch
Mhm.
of the show, right? Like
Yeah.
that was our launch of this show. We just squeezed the intro episode in there and then immediately started covering um, Rings of Power. But yeah, just kind of discussing this. We will eventually cross back over to Middle Earth, of course, because War of Rohirrim is coming out in December. 2026 eventually is going to be slammed with stuff because there's like a new movie coming out. We'll probably after the House of the Dragon episode, I think, kind of cross back over real quick to catch up on some of those news items. I think
Mhm.
might work best, and then you know just kind of going from there.
Yeah.
Okay, so you mentioned it, favorites. Let's kind of discuss our favorites of Game of Thrones first. That'll kind of tell a lot of people about us, like
Mhm.
favorite house. Like if your favorite house is the Boltons, there's a lot that people would learn from us, and
I got some questions for you if that's the answer.
like skinning
Fir-
men alive. Yeah,
first question, how dare you?
yeah. Okay, so I'll start with you, Ron. Give us your favorite house.
Well, it's not going to come as much of a surprise. I am a Stark guy through and through. Not just House Stark in particular, but everything about the North. I am obsessed with it. It is my favorite part of Game of Thrones by far. You know, it's kind of like everybody in the South is kind of like the wusses. You know what I mean? Like the people in King's Landing, and when you go even further than that, but to be a Northman, you know what I mean? To
Yeah.
endure those winters, it's just it's it feels just so gritty and like just real man type shit. You know what I mean? I love the vibe of it. They're all very honorable for the most part in House Stark. I love that they're sort of a moral compass in a world that doesn't really have many of them when it comes to Westeros and crossing the narrow sea and all that. So I love how they have their code and they stick by it and they always have stuck by it, even to a fault. You know, in the case of like Ned or Rob's kind of arrogance blinding him to what ended up befalling all of them over at the Twins there, which is an episode that I'm sure we'll chat about at least a little bit as we progress in this
Mhm.
episode. But yeah, man, I'm Northman Stark through and through for sure.
Does that extend to the Marvel Cinematic Universe? Like, are you Team Iron Man against Cap, like because Tony
Yeah,
Stark, or what?
just all Starks. Yeah, yeah, totally.
um, I know I agree. The Starks are my favorite as well. I don't know if people could tell from my fellowship where I loaded up on Starks, but I do love them a lot. They got the dire wolf, as the sigil, which is really cool. Like you mentioned, being just in the north with the winters. I think they're the intro character, for a lot
Yes.
of people, especially in the show and the movie, in the book, right, where they, after the prologue, those are the people you're introduced to. And like you said, they're honorable. They really feel like the hero characters that we're supposed to be rooting for and following. So I think it's a lot of times people will be rooting for the Starks.
Mm. Yeah, for sure. I mean, just because we had the same answer, I guess we can kind of throw out some more, some more that I was considering in the well, I can't even say considering because it was always going to be Stark all the way. But I guess just some others that I really like. Obviously, House Baratheon. I love the sort of dynamic of and it's tough to even call it a house because it feels like, especially after Robert's death, it's so scattered and all over the place. But it's just when you think of Robert and then you think of Stannis and you think of Renly,
Renly,
like
yeah.
just so different, all three of them. Stannis is this cold kind of says a lot with a little type, and Robert's this sort of boisterous, ha ha, kind of reacts more with his heart than his head sometimes. And then Renly's kind of this not I don't want to say mix of the two because he doesn't have much Stannis, but there's definitely a lot of Robert in him. In addition to maybe by design, like him trying to live up to Robert after his passing and all that. So I just of those main Baratheon figureheads that we get in Game of Thrones, I just love the differences between them, and it's so interesting. I feel like they're the house more than any that you see that in. Like, we were talking about the Starks. They all kind of have that code they live by. The Lannisters, they're with the exception of Tyrion, they all feel, a bunch of peas in the same pod. Whereas the Baratheons are the ones that I think it's a house, but it is a very divided, very distinct house amongst the individuals in it. And I always thought that was really cool.
Well, you know what they say: a house divided cannot stand, and that
And as
Baratheon
we
house
saw,
does
did
not
not
stand.
stand.
Joffrey really weighs that house down.
Big time.
The thing is he a Baratheon or is he a Lannister? Like, his name technically is a
Well,
Baratheon.
yeah. So I you have to put him in the Lannister because he is. I mean,
Right.
through and through, he is a Lannister. I mean,
By
he's
blood.
called. Yes, he is called Baratheon, but just yeah, I don't think you could put him in there.
One that I was really going to pick was the Freys, right? Like, I just love
Mm.
their McPoyle looking Freys that we have.
They are the McCoyles.
No, I'm kidding, of course. I did not ever contemplate anybody. I did contemplate one house that I'll mention once we talk favorite character. because my favorite character actually comes from that house and not the house that I picked. But
Interesting.
there are reasons why I did not pick that house. So yeah,
Trying to think. I mean, I won't. We'll wait till we get there, but I think I got the answer.
yeah, I think you do too. Okay, favorite character then.
All right, this one's a tough one. Like, with the exception of House, really, I feel like all of these are tough ones because they almost change by the day for me. Like, when you ask me who's your favorite Marvel superheroes, I could say Nova and Jean Grey, like no problem, easy. But like with Game of Thrones, because and maybe it's because they're all in the same world as opposed to Marvel. It's like they're all in the same world, but they each, like we don't have a Jon Snow show and a Daenerys show and a this one movie like we do with Marvel. They're all under the same roof. So maybe that's why it's a little tougher to specify like who my overall favorite is, but there's the two that I have to mention at the top of my list are Arya and Davos Seaworth. Arya is badass as fuck. I mean, I think we all weren't too huge on the whole Bravos faceless man thing. Like it got a little draggy there in season 5, but I love her to death. I think she's the most like let me think of how to put it. Like I love that she is often the most knowledgeable and the smartest one in the room, even though everyone just, it's she's a little girl. Like she just gets kind of swept under the rug and like looked at in a very unassuming way. And then she comes up behind you and just shanks you. You know what I mean? I love her. I love her. I think she's awesome. In Davos, I talked pretty in depth about him when I put him on my fellowship team during our last episode. He's another one. I'm big on characters in Game of Thrones that hold their morals and their honorability in the face of a world like that, because there's so much death and backstabbing and all this negative stuff. To be able to keep that code of morality, I think, is very strong and admirable. And he's just Davos. He's so witty. He's so smart. Like he's kind of, I think both of these characters, actually, now that I'm saying it out, they're both kind of like the unassuming ones that you may on a first glance just not even think twice about, but they both have very valuable traits that they bring to the table, and they're both super charismatic and all that. So love them both. Arya and Davos, definitely my two.
Interesting. I know you liked Davos from last week, or when we were doing that, but I didn't think he would be as high on the
Mm-hmm.
list. So
I it's tough because like the way that I went about it was I'll give my real favorite of like the all stars of the cast, but of the sort of B and C sections of the cast. You know what I mean? I wanted to give somebody from there too. So it was
literally
Davos
too, because he's Davos Seaworth, and he's also on the sea, right? So
Seaworth,
literally
yes.
sea.
But like another one that I thought of was Braun, who I also mentioned in the last
There's
one.
the B level, right?
He's in the B. Yeah.
And Arya was your A tier.
Wow, holy shit. Let's just go through the whole cast and like it actually all plays. We cracked the code to how George created the character. But yeah, no, I wanted kind of one of the mains and one of the not so mains, but still very important. So settled on those two. Yeah, love them to death.
Okay, my favorite character, let me know if you got this right or not, is Tyrion Lannister.
Oh no.
Okay, so he is my favorite, but obviously the rest of his house kind of brings him down a bit.
Not great.
Jamie
Not
and
great.
Cersei. Jamie kind of redeems himself a bit, but Tywin, right? And if we want to include Joffrey and all of them, the Lannisters are not a great house. So I would never think of putting them as my favorite house, but Tyrion is my absolute favorite character in Game of Thrones.
Did we have I forget if I mentioned it to you or if I just thought that I was going to mention it to you and forgot. Did we have the talk about the guy who voices Tywin being one of the voices in The Witcher 3?
No, like the guy who plays Charles Dance is in The Witcher?
Yes, he is Ciri's dad, the king.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I heard the voice. I was like, what the fuck? Geralt. I was like, what the hell?
That's awesome.
Yeah. Yes, but yeah, no, it's a great pick. I love Tyrion. He's the man. Um, you mentioned Jamie, and I just kind of want to talk about him for a second because where do you actually fall on Jamie? He is the character I think most of all in Game of Thrones is still very open to interpretation, and like by the end of the show, I feel like you know how you feel one way or the other about every character, and Jamie's the only one that still to this day I struggle with, and even now as I'm going through reading the books, like just such a black and white character. Like the things he does are so gross, and the incest and all this horrible stuff, but like ends up kind of being an honorable guy by the time it's all said and done. But like you kind of struggle with okay, but does that excuse everything that he did prior? I don't really think so. You know, it's just he's a very interesting character to me. You know, the definition of black and white, like I said. So I kind of wanted to gauge how do you feel about him.
Yeah, I guess this is a spoiler for the discussion on what I felt about the ending and stuff because I'm generally a final season truther, meaning like I think it's okay. Like I think it's
Mhm.
fine. Like it's not like a terrible ending the way a lot of people had problems with it. But my
Mhm.
biggest problem with it, Ron, is the Jamie of it because I felt like he was on a really good path. Kind of ends up just leaving Brienne to
Mhm.
go back to Cersei and ends up dying a pretty pointless death.
All in all, yeah.
And that's one of those things where I'm like, okay, is that what George wanted? And they were following some sort of path and they were like, oh crap, we only have a few episodes left. We have to make them do this U-turn.
Mhm.
Or is it one of those things where they didn't know what to do and they wrote their own ending where they felt like he and Cersei, because they had, came into the world together, should go out on the world together. Like something like
Mhm.
that, right? My problem with it is that I feel like it all happens too quickly in that
Mhm.
final season.
Yep.
And I really want George to finish his damn book so I can know what the real path for Jamie was. Because I
Mhm.
was really like somebody that, like, Jamie was one of my top characters. And I thought he was just such an interesting character, like you said, because he's doing these awful things, but he does have this moment where he kind of turns a bit, right? And is more, I don't know, relatable. And even like when you hear those stories of his past where he takes out like the Mad King, right? And gives up the throne, right? Um, it's one of those things where people paint it a certain way, but I think in his real character stuff, it was like maybe he just didn't like he didn't want it, right? And
Mhm.
he did what he thought was right. He thought the king was nuts. Like he did what
Yeah.
he thought was the correct thing to do, not like a power move type of
And
thing.
by the way, he was right.
He
Like,
was, especially when you look at the Danny of it all, right? So
yeah.
uh there is like
I mean,
there
he cooked the Starks, or no, I'm sorry, he cooked one of them and made the other one choke himself to death by trying to reach out for, like that is horrible. Like
yeah,
anybody
yeah.
should have killed him after that. Like you kidding me?
Yeah, but it's like does he starts getting on a good path, but then it does this random 180 with like this is 6 episode final season. It was probably like 3 episodes left, right? That he
Mhm.
does the U-turn, and you're
It was
like
yeah, uh, 4. It was
4 left or whatever,
4.
right? After he, yeah. So you're like
Three is Battle for Winterfell, and then I think it's the next one right after that.
where
Is
he's
it
like, I
not?
gotta leave, yeah, right? Like
Yeah.
he just goes,
Mhm.
and that's tough to wrap up in that. I really wish the final
Mhm.
season was longer than 6 episodes. That's my biggest complaint about it. I think more people would actually be fine with the ending if we had gotten season 7 and 8 being 10 episodes each instead
Mhm.
of the 7 and 6 that they were, or whatever, 8 and 6, whatever they were.
So let's just dive into this now then, because we're here. Because I agree with you completely. I didn't. The last season is by far my least favorite season. I will say that, but I don't really think it was as bad as people make. Like they make it out to be the most unwatchable piece of shit that's ever been put on television, and that's just objectively not true. Like,
People, this is what drives me nuts about social media today is if something is like look, you cannot look at the production value of that final season and be like, it's a piece of junk. Maybe the writing wasn't up to standard, but like there are worse things on TV still at that point, right? Like,
I'll still go back and watch it from time to time,
right,
like the
right.
last season. Like it is far from the piece of shit that everybody makes it out to be. And I think that you're correct in that if it just had the more time to flesh it out a little more, especially when you take into account that season 7 had the same thing. They chopped off 3 episodes, which I'm still not exactly sure what the whole deal with that is. You know, some say it was budget stuff. It feels very weird to slash the budget of the most popular show in history in the last 2 seasons. But there's also did D&D want to go do their Star Wars movie and they were like checked out sort of thing. So I don't know what's really true. Was
I
never
took
fucking happened.
Yeah, yeah, I know. It was like, if you look at Lucasfilm's track record, probably wasn't a good
Yeah.
shot. The way I think about it, when a lot of times when they do this talk of like less episodes, it's not like a budget cut issue. What they were looking at is, can we have more budget to each individual episode because there is less? And that's the route that they took because they wanted to be able to have some of those bigger episodes. The dragons are in them, the battles are in them. So they say, we'll do less episodes, but now we have that same budget for 10 over 7 or 6 episodes.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what they did. But again, you're talking about the biggest show on planet Earth at that time. They couldn't just be like, you get 10 episodes at more budget. You know, like,
Yeah.
why are we, and like we're going to talk about next time with House of the Dragon, where they're talking about budget cuts, and you're like, this is one of the biggest shows on TV.
Yeah.
If you're not going to give the budget to this, what are you giving the
Where's it
budget to?
going?
Right.
Yeah, where the fuck's it going? Yeah, no, I'm with you completely, man. I just, especially for a show like this that relies so much on things being fleshed out and the little details you may have missed along the way, like to just kind of resign from that and just basically say, all right, we're going to shoot 2 really long action movies for the last 2 seasons. It was a misstep. Absolutely was. But I think the action we got was also really good. And I think most people would say that 7 isn't quite in the class of 8 in terms of how people don't look at 7 with that, like, compared to how they view the last season. They sometimes will lump them together because they were both shorter, but I feel like all in all 7 was received a lot better than 8. And I think it was because it was almost like the transition in between that fleshed out sort of intricate long show and the kind of glorified action movie of it all that we got in the last season. I feel
I think
like
it
season 7,
also, I think it also helped that at that point, I think they announced it was over, right? And that they were working their way to the ending. So people had a little bit more grace to it because they're like, we got another season. And
yeah,
I think also that's the season where they reveal the R plus L equals J,
yeah,
right? So
mm-hmm.
people were thinking we're getting answers. We can kind of see where this is going, but it never really went the way that people thought it was going to go.
Yeah, no, like you kind of thought that, like it's weird because obviously the John's true identity being revealed and stuff was a major deal, but it just, because it was so short, it felt like it didn't have the time to get the proper grace that it deserved, because it was a reveal, 6.5 seasons in the making, and then we got like 6 episodes to sit with it, so it was one of those
But
things that
even
was,
with that, people thought that he's the prince that is promised. It's going to, like, he's going to be the one that kills the Night King. No, he's going to be
yeah,
the one that unites and becomes king. No,
nope.
Bran, right? Like,
He's just gonna go hang with Tormund.
he takes out Danny, right? Like, that is what his role is in this. But people, I think, because of the prophecy, because him coming back from life, like, people thought there was going to be more there for John to do. So when you get that reveal, it's a big thing where people are like, season 7, I think to casuals, season 7 is good. And they'll say,
Yeah.
man, like, we're riding high on that reveal. We do this, we do that. We think it's building to maybe them two ruling Westeros together or taking out the Night King. And then it takes a left turn in the final season for them. And that hurts season 8 more than it does 7. Because then people are like, this didn't go the way I thought it was going to go,
Mhm.
which Game of Thrones never usually does anyway.
Yeah,
But then
but
it, for some people, it felt like pointless. Like, what is the point of him being Rhaegar and Lyanna's kid if
Mhm.
it doesn't lead to anything,
Mhm.
right? And that's a valid question, I think.
Mhm. Yeah, no, I agree completely. And when you kind of get into the whole, you know, the Bran on the Iron Throne thing was another one that was a little questionable, just because they made excuse me, such a point for him to be like, I can't do this in the earlier seasons. I can't sit on the throne. I'm not even a real person. I'm just kind of here as this free-eyed raven. And then it just felt a little cheesy to be like, that's exactly why you should be on the throne. And it just, the totality of it all, I totally get why people felt
Let down, or
dissatisfied,
mhm.
yes, by the last season. But I just, I'm glad we're on the same page with that, at least, that we don't think it was as bad as people would probably lead you to believe.
I think that's true with most things nowadays. Like, if you think this is like the worst thing ever, like, go back and watch TV from like the 50s or 60s. Some of those production values or writing, I mean, like, there's worse stuff, right? Like, but people will act like this is like the biggest piece of shit that exists, and you're like, watch more stuff if you think this is the
Yeah.
worst thing you've seen.
Go watch season 10 of The Walking Dead and tell me about, wringing out a franchise until there's nothing left. I don't want to hear shit.
I'll have to read what season 10 was then,
Oh,
because
10
I
and
had
11
dropped
was
off.
just total phoning it in. Just once Rick left, it was a fucking shit show. I
Yeah.
shouldn't say that, actually. The ninth season was pretty good with the Whisperers and all that, but yeah, we're not a Walking Dead show.
No. Okay, let's go favorite death.
Mm.
But this could mean anything. This could be how cool it looked. This could be like you're happy that character died, or it was a good send off. Like, it can be whatever you want.
So I went with just purely, fan satisfaction of it all. Like, there was a lot of deaths that were done very well in this show. Like, I mean, Ned's obviously, for starters, like, of characters that we loved, that it was just, whether either it was a total shock or it was just done in a very sort of way that honors the character. But that's not, I chose Ramsey for this because it was one of the most satisfying, not just deaths in this show, but one of the most satisfying moments in television that I can remember. Especially Sansa being the one to sick his own dogs on him. Just the ultimate, like, fu, like, full circle, like, thing. Kind of what's the I guess, dying by what you live. What's the phrase I'm looking for? Like, when you're playing basketball and they're like, "Oh, you live and die by this," whatever the
Yeah,
phrase is.
yeah.
You get what
It's
I'm saying?
close. Like, live by the sword,
I'm
die
in
by the
the
sword,
I'm in
right?
the stratosphere somewhere. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah,
But
live
yeah,
by the
just
dogs, die by the dogs. Yeah.
yeah, and like just John beating the holy hell out of him first. It was so well done, in the fact that it wasn't just like he was just killed in battle, or like he kind of tried goading John into giving him the coward's way out at the end there. You know what I mean? And they did it well. And they actually showed a little more than I thought they would. I mean, they didn't show the dog like ripping his throat out or anything, but they show him get a pretty good hook on there, and there's some really gross noises. Like, it was done very well, and it was, like I said, very satisfying, and that's why I chose it.
I have two answers to this. I have one for like the precedent it set, and I would say
Mhm.
one for satisfaction. So my
Okay.
satisfaction one is actually Joffrey's on the Purple
Yeah.
Wedding.
Yeah.
Of course, I was reading the first and second book. I haven't finished the second book. I know, not a real fan, but like, I was reading those as like the show was going on, and I'd heard people were actually really good about this online at the time, where they'd be like, book spoilers, like, don't read this. Like, a lot of people were not trying to
Oh,
spoil
how
because they,
far we've fallen since
I know,
then.
they knew they knew what this show was. Like, Red Wedding, people would say the Red Wedding and you had no clue what it was, right? Like, I
Mhm.
had no clue what it was. And then it happens and you're like, Oh, that's why. And because
Yeah.
the people wanted the other fans who hadn't read the books to experience that. Um, I kept hearing about the purple wedding. I had no clue what it was going to be, and it happens, and you're like, that's. I was like laughing, like, oh my god, he's finally dead. Like, this is great. This is what people were talking about, and that one like struck me really well. I remember I was watching it late at night. It was probably after it aired,
Mm.
but I was like catching it up like maybe an hour later or like later that night type of thing.
Mm.
And I'm laying in my bed when I lived with my parents' house, and I'm like watching the recording, and I'm like all the lights off, and I'm like, yeah, let's sit down and watch this episode and see what happens. And I was like, oh my god, like because it wasn't like a finale. Some of these deaths happen at
Yeah.
like a midpoint of the season or before that, and you're like, oh, all
So
right,
they
we're
give
already
you
done.
it's the Red Wedding, I believe, is episode 8
Not,
of 3.
I think it's
Oh, it's
9 of
9.
3 because for a
And the Joffrey,
while.
well, Joffrey's the next episode after that. It's just like it totally catches you off guard because you think that like, yeah, the Red Wedding is going to be the thing this season, and then they just come at you out of nowhere with Joffrey's, and it was just, man, this show was so good at that.
I don't think it was the next episode because okay, Reigns of Castamere is episode 9. Then you have the finale of 10.
Yeah,
Joffrey's was in season 4.
was it?
Yes,
Oh, why did I think it was the finale of 3?
but it was like early of season 4, I believe, and it felt like you're like, wow,
Oh,
like this is pretty quick after that happened. Um, I'm trying to see what oh, it was episode 2 of season 4.
okay.
So it happens really early in the
Mhm.
season. And um again, that's something some shows would save as a finale or like something like that. So this was taking it, super early in season 4. You're like, wow, I thought maybe that would happen at the end of the season, that they'd give them something to, like a victory as we go into season 5. But no, it happens really early, and there's all this fallout from it, and it was just a really great death. My other answer is Ned's death in season 1.
Yeah.
I started watching this show when season 1 was on DVD and Blu-ray. And that
Mhm.
was before streaming. So I had to like buy the season, and I just heard so many great things about it, and I was like, "Oh, it's Sean Bean from Lord of the Rings." Like,
Mhm.
sure, I'll watch this. And I'd seen the poster for season 2 having just the crown on it, and I was like,
Mhm.
"That's weird that they wouldn't have like him on season 2. Like that, there's no way they kill off their main guy, right?
No. No way.
He's the guy." And I was naive, and he dies. I think I got spoiled to it, but before I got to that episode, but I still didn't
Aw.
want to believe it. I still didn't want to believe it. I was like, there's no way he's going to die, right? Like they're just there's no way. And they kill him off, and you're like, okay, really anything can happen in this
Yeah.
show.
Yeah. It was the tone that they wanted to set, and they set it well. And then to their credit, really followed up with that, throughout, like just the episode we're mentioning with Joffrey just getting captain in episode 2. And I love, you kind of referenced that rather than, in so many shows, it's like the premiere and the first couple episodes really just kind of set the table, and it feels like everything's building towards a crescendo at the end. And then they did that with season 3 with the Red Wedding, but then they turn around in 4 and they give you this wow kind of blockbuster moment, and then the story of the season is the fallout from that. I love that model. Again, it serves the unpredictability very well.
All right, let's go to favorite season.
Okay, favorite
Curious
season.
what yours is.
Yeah, yeah. This one was a real tough one. I settled on 3 just because I love the stuff with John Beyond the Wall, with Egret and all that
Hmm.
stuff, and then obviously the Red Wedding is a moment that we'll never forget. And I just recently read it in the book, and it is just as horrible and traumatizing, if you were wondering. But it felt. Let me think how to put it. I don't want to say it felt like it feels the most nostalgic to me, but for like maybe it's just a thing of where I was at life at that point or whatever, but like it's the one that I go back to as like my quote unquote comfort season the most.
Hmm.
I don't know why, but it's just especially when you consider what happened in that season, it wasn't a very comforting season. But I just John's story in that season and all the stuff with the red wedding and all that, just I had to put it at the top. It was close though. I almost went 4. It just I had this one by a hair.
I didn't really have an answer at first, but I'm looking at the episodes, and it is season 4 for me. You
Yeah,
get the
yeah.
purple wedding, you get Tywin dying, right? It really felt like we were building to something there. You have the Mountain and the Viper fight with Oberyn.
Watchers
If
on the Wall with
yes,
the wildlings invading. Yeah, no, it's great. It's definitely a 1B for me.
we get Bran reaching the Three Eye Raven, like you get so much stuff that is going on in that where it feels like it is reaching that crescendo, right?
Mhm.
This is also the season where Lysa Arryn dies. Like
Yeah.
it really felt like we were building to something at that point where you're like, okay, like Tyrion is now going through the stuff. He's free, and like Peter Dinklage was killing it in the role. Like
Hmm.
it just like for me that was peak Game of Thrones. Um, at that point because there was just season 4 is so much stuff going on in those 10 episodes.
Yeah. No, you're right. You're 100% right. It's I don't know if this is me just like remembering differently or anything. Like, obviously, the show was a smash from day one, 100%. But it felt like 4 and then into 5 is where it just blew up to a point where it was this massive cultural phenomenon. Again, it was there.
You're
Obviously,
right. You're right though. I'm looking at viewership by millions. It increases like every season
mm,
uh for the first 4 or whatever, but season 4 it reached like at the 7 millions, right? And then
mhm.
season 5 goes into the 8s.
Yeah.
Season 6 will go back down to like 7, so like but
Mhm.
then season what is this one? 7 goes up to like 10 million. But it was because of the hype of the Red Wedding, I think, where
Yeah.
then people go to season, they catch up. And then season 4, everybody's caught up. Like, I think that was around the season my mom got into the show because my dad had been watching it. Like, I'd got my dad into it. We get to the Red Wedding stuff. And then my dad would rewatch the show a lot, like just whatever. So then they did a full rewatch up to season 4 or whatever. So my mom would catch on and like stuff like that. So that definitely seemed to be the one where it was starting to really reach like critical
Yeah.
mass.
It became, it wasn't again, it's tough because I don't want to say like it was a secret because it definitely wasn't a secret and people were talking about it. But like to your point, that's when like people's moms started finding out about it. You could mention Daenerys at the water cooler at work and everybody would know who you were talking about, type of thing.
Yeah. Especially like I think the first season had 3 million viewers. So at a certain point, you're like getting to like more than double it, and it's like
Yeah,
really moving. Okay. Do you have a favorite episode?
I do. And again, this one was so tough. I considered Watchers on the Wall. I considered a couple from season 4 actually. Hot take, but I considered the Battle for Winterfell. I know people have the problems with it was too dark, yada yada yada. It's called The Long Night. Did you expect it to be in the middle of the afternoon? Like this
Well,
that's
I will say with that, like there's ways that you can shoot night with it looking clear to the viewer.
Yeah, and there were some parts, like especially inside of the castle at Winterfell, like with Arya's stuff, like where it was a little rough. But in the beginning, especially the beginning of the fight, I thought that the darkness was almost as much of a character as the characters themselves. Like when you see all of the Dothraki, with their swords ride off into the night, and then you just see one by one they get snuffed out, their flaming swords, and they all come riding back, and I loved it. I thought it worked really well. So I considered it, but ultimately I have to go with Hardhome. It was we had gotten exposure to White Walkers and all that beforehand, and as you mentioned, we saw Bran reach the tree, and like we saw everything that happened there. But seeing the full scale of what they can do, and watching them all come over that mountain and basically kind of like dive bomb onto all the wildlings here in this village, and it's where we learned that Valerian steel can kill them, and it just there's that really tense scene where they close the gate, right? And there's all the noise outside, and then it just goes quiet. And then it just out of nowhere, they just bang, they start running against the gate, and it's just absolute mayhem. It was like literally, I was like grabbing my chair watching that for the first time. It was crazy. Also, actually, weirdly, the episode where Danny meets Tyrion for the first time as well, after he goes across the narrow sea with Lord Varys. So I just love that episode so much, and I had to go with it. But there was a lot in consideration here for sure.
This one might be a shock because it does not come from season 4 for me, but and it's a controversial episode, I would say. But I really enjoyed season 7's Beyond the Wall.
Yeah, let's go. That was one I was considering too.
Yeah, when they go north of the wall to get the white, right? And you just have like that whole band of brothers vibe where they're
It's
all
an
going
all-star
to,
team.
yeah.
John
You
the
have
Hound, Jorah, Tormund,
Thoros, right?
Beric
Yeah,
Dondarrion, Thoros of Myr. Yeah, who well man, I can't wait for you to get back in the books. Just don't play a drinking game for every time they mention Thoros of Myr storming Pike, because you will be donezo.
oh, I'm sure. And then they also had, Benjen sacrifices himself in that one,
Yes.
right? We have the you get Viserion getting resurrected by the Night. Like it was a that was a big like moment where you're like, oh my god, what are they doing? And then it's them reanimating the dragon, and you're like, oh god, like how do you stop these people,
Just see
right?
that
Like
eye open, and it's like, oh god.
yeah. So that was a favorite episode of mine for sure.
It was awesome. The only reason, literally, it was Watchers on the Wall, that, and Hard Home were the three that I was kind of considering. The only thing that threw me off about that episode was it felt a little weird that so the Hound keeps throwing those rocks across the water, and then one of them skirts across the ice, and now it's like they realize they can go across it. That felt a little cheesy for me, almost like a shit, okay, we have the characters in this situation, but now we don't know how to progress the story out of this situation. And it felt like that's just kind of what they landed on, and I think they could have been a little more creative there. But outside of that, I agree with you. I think it's a great episode. The White Walker bear, like that shit was
Yeah,
awesome.
yeah.
That shit was great. I love the episode. Great pick.
Okay, and then another general question I just have is, what villain did you hate the most? I think I might know from your answer earlier. Is it Ramsay?
It is. It is indeed. You know, anytime you get into the like SA kind of stuff, I don't even know if saying like the sexual assault kind of stuff,
Oh,
it just
I was
that's
when you said that, I was thinking like writing an essay. I was
oh,
like, right?
no, like anytime you get into that stuff, it's like it's a pretty instant no go for me. Not in the sense that like, oh, I'm
Mhm.
not watching this, but the quickest way to get me to hate you as a character is to do some shit like that. And they were pretty graphic with what they showed, like making Theon watch what he did to Sansa and all that stuff. He was just the worst of the worst, and did it very well to his credit. I forget the actor's name off the top of my head, but he is very good at playing an asshole. He's actually who I would like to see Marvel cast as Mr. Sinister once we finally get there into X-Men stuff. I think he would be great for that role. But yeah, he was by far my most hated villain, and not surprisingly, also my most satisfying death. So I guess at the same time, it's like kudos, but also fuck you, dude. Like, good job,
I,
but also I hate you.
it's so tough for me because I for a while it really was Joffrey, and then like Ramsay, like I hated him, I guess, but like he wasn't really in love with Ramsay. I would say Cersei is somebody that
Yeah.
really kind of grinded my gears. Um, especially like her death is not satisfying, I feel like in the show. So
Mhm.
like those other characters have that.
Yeah.
Um, so I would probably say like she was my like most hated because she lasts like the whole show. And
Mhm.
even when she's presented with like the whites and stuff, she's like, nah, I don't care.
Yeah.
You're like,
And it's like they tried putting her, with shame and all that stuff.
yeah,
Like
yeah.
they did a really good job of breaking her down as a character and like showing her being vulnerable for the first time basically in the entire show. Especially at least to that extent. Like we'd seen little moments here and there. But they do that and then she gets, she's back and it's like I don't want to say she's learned nothing because is Game of Thrones really about that? What did we learn at the end of the day? But like, it just felt like she went back to being the same exact character after that. Which, I guess if that's what you're going for, it's like no matter she's always going to be that bitch no matter what. Like no matter what happens to her or whose eyes she has to see things through. Whether it's being in the bottom of a prison for however long she was there or being the queen regent, what have you. I just I didn't like how they basically just what I referenced didn't really give her much more depth after that happened. If anything, it just made her more like angry and kind of bitchy. And then to not have that truly satisfying end, I think is enough to as great of a villain as she is to maybe put her a tier below the others that
Mhm.
we're referencing.
Yeah. She there was times where I felt sympathy for her, unlike I did for the other characters,
Yeah.
other villains, but she just never, like you said, never really learns from it and just goes back to her old ways. And that's kind of like,
Very one note.
yeah, yeah. All right, so I guess let's talk. We talked about the ending a bit.
Mhm.
Um, what are your chances out of 10? Scale of 1 to 10 that George R. R. Martin finishes the last two books here.
The last two, 0. I think it's 0. My only hope is that he finishes Winds of Winter in time, and it's tough because, like, I want to say then maybe in the event of something untimely. I mean, he's an old guy. Like, we're not speaking out of turn here. He's not going to live forever. None of us are. And these books take a very long time to write. So I would like him to finish this one, get the beats that he wants for the last one, not in the sense of like they did with the last season of the show where he gave, a few plot points and was like, you guys fill in the rest. Get a legit document of all the things you would like to have in this book and give it to a writer that you trust to do it the right way. Just finish the story, man. Like it's one, and I don't want to sound like a hypocrite because I'm very new to the books myself, but a lot of people have been waiting a very long time to see this thing wrap up the right way, and it would be a huge disservice to the people that made George what he is to just not finish that story. And I understand he's a supremely busy guy. He's got a lot going on, a lot of HBO sets to visit, and a lot of blogs to write complaining about those visits. But just, dude, it's the books are what made you. You gotta finish them one way or the other. So I don't think where he's gonna have the time to do both. My only hope is that he finishes 7 and just has or 6. I
Six.
one,
Yeah.
2, 3, 6. Yeah, I got to count my books up there. Finish 6, and if you can't, if you're not feeling like you're going to be able to finish 8, in this next X amount of year, I don't want to sit here and like try to put a time limit on George's life. Obviously, I hope he lives to be 100, but just have a backup plan there so that one way or another this story can reach people's hands and give them the conclusion that they deserve.
This you bring up some good points. This story started in 1996, released. Um,
On 20 years,
yeah.
30 years, 30
30.
years.
We're
Excuse me.
approaching 30. We're at 28. This There's been 5 books. For the first 3, They were released pretty good succession. 96,
Mhm.
99, 2000, 2005, and then 2011. And even at that point, people were like, hey, that took a while.
Kind of a
It took
bit of a
6 years.
while, yeah. He's like, I'll show you a while.
We're approaching 13. We're at 13 years since the last book.
And I get you can't rush perfection, but like at the end of the day, you can speed things up a little bit. Like you can't have such bad writer's block, dude, that it's taken you 13 fucking years to write this book. Especially because like it feels like for
Well,
a
as a
while
writer, I can tell you, you can. You can. I've
I
I've
guess
tried
just
writing
well
books
in
this
his
long.
case where everything is already so set up, like
Yeah.
you would imagine that he's had a plan for where at least relatively where this thing is going to go, for at least the last 10 years,
It
like
started as a trilogy, and then it moved to I think 5, and then he was like, "No, I need 6. No, I need 7." Like
yeah.
I wouldn't be shocked if he comes out and says I need 8 actually, because like
Oh,
he
please
he
no.
did get himself into a little bit of a trouble with the what he calls the Marines knot, right? The
Mm,
Marinesian knot that he's in,
mm,
where all these characters, and part of it is because he wanted to do a time skip after the Red Wedding and
yeah.
ended up not doing it. And now those characters are still super young. He has to get some of those characters out of the way. Like in the books, right? Danny's still over in Essos. Like we have
Mm,
quite a bit to cover in the last 2 books.
yeah.
And I
Stannis is
actually
still alive. Like,
I have to think, Ron, as well, that I have to think that he saw the reaction and those that was his ending. And he's
yeah,
like, I actually have to change some stuff.
I wouldn't be surprised, man. At least in terms of the main, like the brand sitting on the throne, John killing Danny, all these things, like the main beats. Yeah, I do. I don't think he would allow them to. Like, if he thought that this was a bad idea going into it, I mean, look, dude, we see what he's doing with House of the Dragon. Anytime he disagrees with something, he's on that blog. So, like, I think that if this was a plan that he totally disagreed with from the rip, we would have heard about it. So I think you're bang on there, George. I think he had to go back to the writers' table after that, and it's probably pushed things back a few years since then.
And I would have to think that if he did it his way, it would be better received anyway because it would
Mhm.
more setup. You have more pages. There's no screen time, right? Like you can do
Yeah,
whatever you want with the pages. So I don't know if it's like him thinking, okay, I got to flesh this out even more to make it make sense, or if he's like, I got to tweak some stuff because of that, and it's causing him some problems. But I know he said he made a lot of progress in 2020. There's been some years he hasn't made any progress, right? Like it just
years where he
is,
hasn't made any like that's insane to me. I'm sorry,
yeah.
and again, I'm not a writer. I know these things are delicate, but you had a whole year where you couldn't write anything. Like that's insane. You know, in my humble opinion. But I still love him. I don't want to seem like this is just a bag on George Fest for me.
Yeah. No, it's I sympathize with him, but it's also did you hear what he wanted to do? This came out today, I think it was, where after he's done Winds of Winter, he wants to do a spin-off that or write a story in Westeros that HBO didn't want to do. Um
Whoa. Oh, I
and
didn't
he
see
wants
that.
to take it on himself after Winds of Winter. Not after everything's done, after Winds of Winter, which means then that's pushing a dream of spring back a
Keep
little bit.
keep dreaming. Keep dreaming.
Yeah. Let me see if I can find it real quick on what it was cuz it was
I thought I saw something recently too where he said he wanted to do like is the
he
Hedge
wants
Knight
to he
series
wants
not
to write a Bravos Game of Thrones story that HBO scrapped, but only when Winds of Winter is done.
okay? That's interesting. I didn't even remember hearing about a Bravo show that got scrapped.
Me
I mean, we've
neither.
heard about a lot of shows in the Game of Thrones universe that have been scrapped, but I don't recall hearing about a Bravos one. So that's interesting. I mean, I don't know, like cool, but it's still just I don't know, man.
Just
Why are
get it
you?
done.
Yeah, just get your main thing done before you start worrying about other things. And like, yes, I have that problem in my daily life as well of like
Same.
getting sidetracked and doing all this other stuff. But like, man, come on, we're dying for it.
Yeah. And look, like you said, there's a chance. I hope he would find somebody if and line somebody up if he does pass, because that's how Wheel of Time finished. Was Brandon Sanderson stepped in and finished that book due to finish like the last two or three books for Robert Jordan. His wife reached out to Brandon Sanderson and had him complete it. And I mean, that was on top of Brandon Sanderson writing his own mega books as well. And he's churning out like thick books every
Maybe give it to him.
chance he
I
can.
mean,
He wrote like he wrote 4 or 5 books during lockdown. This guy, like it's crazy, right? He writes really quick. So I mean, like, yeah, if you need some help or if you want to break in case of emergency option, find some. He's friends with them too. So I mean, like, he does know
yeah.
Brandon Sanderson. So I mean, like that, or like somebody else that fits your style if you're worried about somebody fitting your style. But yeah, like I think you do owe it to the fans in a sense of, especially the ones that have been around the 30 years.
Yeah.
They've been waiting for resolution.
Mhm.
We can get all the spin-off shows, and it's great that you can go visit the set. I'd be doing the same thing.
Yeah.
But I do think there's be certain times where I have to like just buckle down and get it done to for the people that made you famous, right?
Yeah.
That got it done. So
With you
hopefully.
100%. Yep.
I had the theory before maybe he was going to release both at the same time, or like, like stagger
Mhm.
them, but there's no way his publisher is going to be like, "Oh, you finished that book, let's sit on it until you're done the other one." They'd be like, "Hand it
No way.
over. It's 13 years late and give it to me."
Hand it over. 100%. Yeah, there's no way they would let that sit on the shelf right now.
No, they'd say, because they're pestering him too. They're calling him probably all the time. So when's the next chapter? You got any chapters done that you can? Because he's probably got an advance on this book. Like they're probably
Oh
sitting
yeah.
there like, when are we getting this?
Our wallet's looking a little empty and our shelves are looking a little empty too, George.
Yeah,
What are we
like
doing?
come on,
Yeah.
yeah. So hopefully it happens, but I don't know.
We'll see. At the very least, we know we're getting the sixth one. That one that seems again short of something totally unforeseen, which we're keeping our fingers crossed that that's not the case. I feel pretty good in that we're going to get 6, maybe even a little sooner than we're expecting, just because right now we don't even know when to expect. We've just gotten these sort of vague little updates here and there, but I think I'm going to say end of next year or early 26. I think that we'll at the very least get the date of when this book comes out.
Okay.
If it doesn't just come out altogether, I wouldn't put that past them at all either. To just be like, oh hey, by the way, it's out today. Like that would be a kind of cool thing for people, especially because there's been so many vague updates and nothing burger comments from him, to just be like, all right, here it is, guys. Like that would be cool. And I think you would probably earn back some grace that he's lost with people who have been super frustrated over this last decade plus.
Yeah, I think I actually do think the chances. I never gave my answer. I would say the chances. I'm gonna be optimistic and say there's a 4 out of 10 chance these finish.
Okay.
I think once he gets done this book, the 6th one, the 7th one could fall into place rather quickly for him.
Mm-hmm.
I think if he figures out the issues that are going on right now for him to get to the
Yep.
end, when he gets done this next one and kills off some characters and moves people into the right place, that 7th book may come pretty quick to him. Like, okay, it's falling into place. Let me knock it out now.
Mm-hmm.
Where there's only like maybe a couple years in between the books instead of like 13, right? Like that I could see happening. But yeah, I it's funny when you said 2026, I still think that's probably too soon for Winds of Winter. I think it's going to take a bit.
Yeah, no, it wouldn't surprise me whatsoever. Yeah, I think that's kind of where I am at it. I think most likely beginning of 26, not I think if it was going to be next year, we probably would have heard a little more by now. But I do think it's going to come a little quicker than we're thinking right now.
Because here's the thing too, when he's done, it usually takes, I think, 3 to 4 months for them to be able to print the copies, and they're going to want
Yep.
some time to be able to properly promote it. They'll be like, it's finally here. Here it is. It's coming out in June. Like that will
Probably try to sync it up with the release of like a new season of House of the Dragon, or this Night of the Seven Kingdoms thing, something that they can just do all, how like on all the books now it says adapted from the popular hit HBO show. Like they'll want to be able to stick one of those big things on there for sure.
Yeah. So I do think we'll have him, of course, probably say when he's done, or like the publisher would say, hey, he's done. We're gearing this up for 5 months from now, like type of thing, that we'll know when it's coming at that point. But
yeah.
Yes,
we'll see.
So next week, or next episode, which will be in 2 weeks, we'll be talking about House of the Dragon. We'll talk about the spinoff, what our thoughts on it are. I'll maybe share some of my thoughts on Fire and Blood because I have read that, and we'll talk about George's thoughts on that, which we teased quite a bit in this episode, and then then from there we'll see what we get to after that. But that's our next big Game of Thrones topic: is House of the Dragon. Is it good or bad? We'll discuss.
We'll see. Also, I guess but before I don't know if we mentioned it in the last episode because we had TJ with us and we were so excited to chat with him, but it's been really cool that every single episode of this show that we have done so far, the viewership has increased. It's just been steady the entire way. And for those of you out there who have been listening, we are very appreciative because this is something that we love very much. It's a topic that we care about a lot. And it's good to see that passion is coming through and resonating with you guys. I mean, we're not a juggernaut by any means, but every little bit helps. So just thank you, I guess, to everybody out there who's been listening and will continue to listen.
You're right. That's true. That's not something I mention when we have guests on because I don't want to sound like we're,
the number
bragging.
one show. Yeah.
Their podcast is great too, but we're number one right now. Yeah, like no. Or we're seeing such great growth. I try
unlike
not to
your puny show guest.
Try not to do that when we have people on because it's just like the spotlight on them is what I usually like to
all of whose shows are massively bigger than ours at the moment.
Way bigger than ours. Yeah. But no, you raise a good point. Yes, we've seen growth for like almost every episode going forward, especially during Rings of Power. Each recap was bigger listens, bigger watches, so we really are appreciative of that. And like I said, we'll be doing War of Rohirrim in December. 2026 we'll have the Gollum movie. We'll have next year a Night of the Seven Kingdoms that we'll be covering here. I do want to get to Wheel of Time at some point. But I kind of want to finish that book before I watch the season, type of thing. And then I was thinking maybe we just do like once I'm done that, like maybe we do a discussion on the pilot episode and see like, and you'd be able to give like feedback of like, would you continue watching it? And then like me would be able to give like the book reader, perspective or something. So like there's that kind of stuff that can happen throughout the show, throughout our weeks as well.
It's the reason that we call this the fantasy folk and not, the Middle Earth folk or the Westeros folk, so we can branch out and cover everything in the genre. So I'm 100% down for that. You just let me know when.
Wester Earth. Okay, well that'll wrap us up here.
Off the tongue. No. Yeah, the same way fantasy folk does. I think we got it right.
We got it right, yeah. At fantasyfolkpod on all of our social medias. You can email us fantasyfolkpod@gmail.com as well if you want to send any long form feedback. You can now comment on Spotify, or you can rate us there. You can rate us on Apple Podcasts and leave a review. It helps more people find the show. And on the YouTube, you can also just leave us comments here on the video below. All of our socials are in our description in case if you couldn't remember if it was the Fantasy Folk Pod or Fantasy Folk Pod. That's all listed in your description of the podcast or on the YouTube description. Have a great rest of your week, and we will catch you next time.